reason we have come here today is for Open Secret, the Lisbon edition of Open Secret, which is kind of a project that is traveling around the world, and it involves film screenings of some really interesting video art and film.
I decided to take a walk.
And we're going to be going upstairs at 7 o'clock to watch a schedule of films curated by Open Secret.
And the collection of films you'll see are not just films, they're actually like portals to each artist's universe and practice.
I was lying under the blanket, hiding, was trying to protect my inner child.
The reason we are in Lisbon this week at all is because we are releasing a book by Lucas called Unconscious Television. The book itself comes as the second in a series, at least we didn't know it when it started, but now we consider this to be the second in a series, following this book, Dialogues on CoreCore and the Contemporary Online Avant-Garde. So tonight my kind of task is to explain how these three things fit together, at least from our perspective as the publisher, Open Secret, Unconscious Television and CoreCore. I will try to tie these things together in a knot as a way of prefacing the films that you're about to see. So I will speak in two halves. The first is going to be a kind of background of the book, and again it's going to try to show how one book follows from the other. In the second half of my talk I will be sort of LARPing as a psychoanalyst, and I will be trying to kind of give an introduction to Open Secret, to leave some thoughts in your head, to hold in your thoughts while you're watching these film screenings, because again I cannot stress enough that we are here today to watch a really beautiful program of film and cinema that have been curated by Open Secret. We, as Becoming Press, the publisher of this book, came into contact with Open Secret via the book that we published previously, Dialogues on CoreCore, which is an anthology of essays and artworks that several people in this room have participated in, and we are again very grateful for these people coming in today. Mischa, Dana, we have Rokas in the room with us, as well as Chaotic Rhizomatic or Lilu. And I'm saying that the book we are launching this week is spiritually the successor to the project of CoreCore, or Dialogues on CoreCore. On one level, Unconscious Television turns to Japanese anime in order to make psychoanalytical point that would be otherwise difficult to explain. And in the same way, I feel like we needed to include Open Secret in this series of events in order to explain the connection between CoreCore and Unconscious Television. Open Secret in a way mediates the connection that is otherwise a bit more subtle and not easy to refer to. So Dialogues on CoreCore, the subject of this anthology that brought us all into contact was a transient micro avant-garde movement that flickered through TikTok and Instagram for a while. An avant-garde filmmaking movement that made use of social media technologies, which have increasingly attempted to incorporate things like miniature software suites, such as TikTok's video editing capacities. So I wouldn't say exactly that Open Secret limits itself to CoreCore, but at the very minimum, the overlap between the participants of Open Secret and Dialogues on CoreCore speaks volumes. This group of artists, filmmakers and writers collaborated in the CoreCore book, and they continue to collaborate in Open Secret outside of the specific framework of CoreCore. I wanted to take a moment to read a passage from the editor of both of these books. It's a friend of ours based in Montreal, a very interesting filmmaker and intellectual who goes by the alias Onti. So I can start by just reading a little bit of a passage from their introduction, and I will start under the subheading, why make this book at all, or why does this book deserve to exist? None of this actually demanded any explanation. Commentary is an interaction, not an unfolding of secret meanings. That's a quotation from Louis Morel. It is almost inappropriate to create a book like this. A book whose static, physical, two-dimensional frame cannot but violate its twin foci of CoreCore, video work and film, which is composed of movement, and the online, which is both in perpetual movement and requires no external IRL supplement in order to be interpreted. A book is necessarily somewhat gatekeeping and archivization at the same time. We cannot afford to give the book away, and it cannot be updated after we print it. So why make this book at all? I can only speak to my own motivations as the editor of this volume when I invite the reader to treat this book primarily as an obstacle. I am intimately aware of the inner workings of the academic cultural interpretation machine, having participated in those institutions for many years. And we are, by my estimation, less than a year away from the first academic article being published by some anthropologist or cultural theorist on the subject of CoreCore. The progenitors of the genre are already being contacted by MA and PhD students, On its face, there is nothing wrong with this, but soon there will be a minor stratum of academic literature on CoreCore, and academics will read that literature. And when more is written, they will cite that new literature, and so on. And the distance between the cultural object and the scope of interpretation will widen until the artists, autodidacts, and shitposters, and so on, will have to demand passage before crossing. So by obstacle, what I mean is that this book's intended function is to introduce a toll booth of sorts into the cannibalistic citational loop. The cost of this toll booth is that this book does not simply offer a transduction of CoreCore into text, it imports its difficulties into its form. The design of this book was entirely composed with this aim in mind, and this book, for me, is a staged intervention in the interaction between cultural writer and culture. Bearing in mind Redacted Cut's wonderful observation that CoreCore assigns primacy to the position of editor, as opposed to the conventional film's cinematographer, the major design choices were in terms of form and structure. The book can be read in any order, perused, discarded, and picked up again. It's a meandering survey, a discography, a collage. It has no overarching perspective or thesis. And the texts are created as images. Design elements are incorporated into their layout, and in some cases they are directly imported as screenshots, or they are printed, then scanned, and then imported again. They are scarred with rain, scroll, and other files. What you see in the book is the intersection of various stages and mechanisms of production. Some of the texts might be a bit hard to read or look at, but so is CoreCore, and so are images. URLs and QR codes are incorporated throughout the book, most of which are functional. Scan your phone over the pages and you might open some line of flight into video, audio, or website. This book is not just about CoreCore, since CoreCore itself is not about CoreCore. It hovers between a survey of grassroots online art, an anthology of experimental and critical essays, and a para-academic volume of the conference proceedings. And indeed, while certainly being para-academic, this text invites the reader to take each work seriously, without an academically editorial perspective. Many of the works are experimental or difficult and composed from individuals both inside and outside of the institutions of writing. Anthropologists should think of this book as written by interlocutors. An exciting variety of artistic methods and philosophies are featured. For example, Edson Javier's Cursed Image Archive, originally a video work, is here decomposed into a series of still images archiving the strata of online material that subsists below the surface of autosuggestions. Through a methodology of online archaeology, we might call a reverse censorship curation. Another example is Machine Yearning's film Ways of a Swamp. It is a combination of text, video AI, and LLM technology, crafted into subtle Lovecraftian and Southern Gothic atmospheres. Filmmakers Louis Higgins, Dana Dawud, and Redacted Cut present reflections on how CoreCore has come to inform their respective works in terms of method, form, and political thrust. Internet Artist Society If Text Wall features a selection of their ongoing project, Digital Repository of the Utopian Impulse, deploying mimetic and diagrammatic imagery to amass an ever-growing map or syllabus of utopian literature. I'll end this with the final passage of this introduction, which reads, "A recurring motif in this volume's design is the asterisk. The asterisk is an ancient symbol found as early as the Ice Age, and its meanings crystallize neatly around the themes of this volume. At once, the asterisk is deployed to omit, to indicate the use of censorship, and to indicate the presence of something in excess of the text, or to indicate exception, to indicate emphasis, to indicate zero, all instances of a change in level or order, and so." And you can see that we designed unconscious television to include or to foreground the use of the asterisks as well, something that we feel was a really strong reflection and representation of the work Onti did alongside Dylan Smith in Dialogues on CoreCore. The asterisk, in a way, is the marker of the continuity between Dialogues on CoreCore and Unconscious Television. It is a symbol we incorporated into our design in order to create a fusion. Yet I think I need to go several steps further back in order to explain this point. So without knowing, in the first era of Becoming, we were designing some video materials for some part of our website. And those video materials had, without us really being aware of the movement, they had a kind of CoreCore aesthetic to them, or style that related to CoreCore. Though again, we had never heard of this term at that point. And for this video task, we enlisted the support of some friends that we had made via Instagram, including Mischa Yearning, who I mentioned just before, and Onti. The two of them stepped forward and asked, is there anything we can do to help you with the video aspect of this project? And we were very grateful for these contributions. But at some point, Onti, the editor of these two volumes, or these two books, presented us with a film. We're not exactly sure why they decided to send this film to us. We hadn't been hosting films at the time, but we really liked this work, and we were talking about it a lot. Some essays were published about it, one by Onti, one by myself. There was a flurry of activity in response to this, and so the idea of the conference emerged in order to address all the dialogue that was coming up around this topic. The conference, as some of you may know, was called All is Nothing to Us. By themselves, the connections we were seeing were fragile, but the amount of fragile connections we saw started to create a kind of binding power. No one was really sure at that moment in time whether CoreCore even still existed as a movement. And some had suggested that by now, any analysis of the topic was a matter of autopsy. Regardless, something essential to both the CoreCore book and CoreCore itself lives on in open secret. The conversation, however, within this community moved on from CoreCore to internet cinema. Was CoreCore a period-specific manifestation of internet cinema, or did internet cinema somehow grow out of the CoreCore movement? In the middle of this situation, we received the email from Lucas containing the book proposal. And it turned out that Lucas was recommended to speak to us at Becoming by a contributor to the CoreCore book, and that's something we only found out quite recently. But nonetheless, Lucas appeared with a book proposal, which we read and we loved. But I kept thinking as I was reading it about Onti's work, and so I asked Onti to work with us once again as the editor of Lucas' book, without fully knowing the extent that their becomings were already connected. They felt aligned, like two sounds harmonizing. We decided as early as that to play into this and to start imagining Unconscious Television as following on from Dialogues on CoreCore, in spirit, in design, in color and style and so on. The dialogues on internet cinema that are circulating today are somehow testament to this continuity. The way the conversation is unfolding mirrors the way CoreCore was discussed. For example, and this is a very pertinent point, Dawud, the curator of Open Secret, has said, internet cinema doesn't exist, there is no internet cinema. I would like to add the part yet, because whether it will ever come, or if it will always remain in the future, is an interesting question, as reflexivity or immanence seems to be the inescapable subject of CoreCore, Open Secret, and internet cinema. Internet cinema is not cinema about the internet, neither is it simply for the internet. It is cinema of the internet, perhaps, cinema possible through the internet, another series of self-referential reflexes. In another sense, internet cinema is a nothingness. It doesn't exist, and yet we are still talking about it, and it is happening nonetheless. Perhaps it is this nothingness that forms the bridge between these three domains. And we can look more at this nothingness, and I would perhaps like now to turn to a text that was in the book, by Persis Beckering. It's about negation and the unconscious, and the unconscious played a role in what people were thinking when it came to CoreCore. And I will read just a part of it. In his short, rather enigmatic text, Negation, Freud offers a theory of the meaning no. Beginning with an exploration of the no of the analysand in the clinic setting, he quickly and without warning moves on to speculate on the nature of thinking itself, of the function of negation in perception and apprehension, and ultimately of negation as constituent of dialectical understanding and a step to absolute knowing. In its most simple sense, negation is at work when an object is denied, such as an interpretation of a dream that seems rather obvious. Negation allows the speaking subject to keep this element repressed, not having to face it, yet still speak it. It's not my mother, so it's your mother, Freud replied to his analysans. After the symbol or signifier of negation, after all, the word mothering is still uttered. Negation, Freud thought, enables the subject to study an entity as object, while maintaining repression. The known keeps an object at safe distance, as an external point of reference. We negate that which is repressed, a gesture that is purely formal, to be able to face and salvage the content of it without overcoming repression as such. We can speak about mother as long as we speak about not mother. This brings us back to the negativity of CoreCore. The point of this short diagonal reading of Freud is to show that through the symbol of negation, with which CoreCore presents us a chain of content, some kind of bypassing of the compulsion of the pleasure principle could be operative, by sidelining the conscious, cerebral, meaning-making ego, which is always a judging ego, deciding good or bad, pleasurable or not pleasurable, reject or keep. Existing regimes of judgment and interpretation are disabled. Interestingly, and contra Freud, this just feels pleasurable. It feels autonomous. We like CoreCore because it is not imposing anything. Through this mobilization of unconscious understanding, however, other connections could be forged. My hypothesis is therefore that CoreCore is not meaningless, yet points to a constitutive contradiction in the production of knowledge. In deploying this strategy, CoreCore would be able to break open existing structures of compulsive self-repetition, finding a new language and new modes of engaging with the world, much like the work of psychoanalysis. So that's from a text by Persis Beckering. It's not meaningless on negation and the unconscious in CoreCore. It helps to hint at the importance of the unconscious and the negative in thinking about open secret, CoreCore and internet cinema. Unconscious television attempts to elaborate on what is happening with CoreCore, with open secret, with internet cinema. And these elaborations form more connections and strengthen all of these subtle bonds.
There's no meaning to any of this, so I wanted to find the most meaningless thing that I could come to and join, and here I am. Gotta admit, it's completely meaningless. Boy, that is just the absolute lowest aiming, I don't care. There is no meaning, just things happening.
I would like to talk a little bit about nothingness, and I would like to begin at the start of the French philosophical tradition, of which Lacan and Guattari and this book arguably are a part of. So I would like to start with Sartre. So by chance, I have been reading a book by Frederick Jameson. It's a book called The Years of Theory. And I haven't read Jameson before, and in many regards, I still haven't, because this is a talking book. It's a transcription of a lecture series that he gave, I believe, at Duke University in 2021. It goes into the history of the French philosophical period, and it tries to talk about the development of its problematique. And reading this book, whilst very much involved in the process of putting together Unconscious Television, brought to my mind something that I would like to share with you before watching the films of Open Secret. So we start with the idea of the look, and in many ways this idea comes from Sartre, and it has a lot to do with his understanding of être, with being, which he also considers to be a nothingness. So for Sartre, being is être en soi, being in itself. And being is not consciousness. As for Sartre, consciousness is being for itself, être pour soi. And then we could say, within this existentialist framework, that you cannot be conscious, you can only be conscious of something. There is always an object involved, or another involved, which means for Sartre, being is a nothingness. It is not a thing at all. And I can read a small passage here from Jameson about the look. We are always look-at-able. We are always visible. We are always victims of the look of other people. We are always vulnerable to the look of other people. And that's why the look is an alienation. And our own look always comes second. I can't see it anywhere. What comes first is the existence of other people. Other people are looking at me, and therefore I have some kind of existence. Then, maybe, I look back at them, and I can do something to them. But you don't need to philosophize whether other people exist, because that's a certainty that you have from being born. So from Hegel, we have this kind of story that Jameson now recounts through Sartre. At first you are one with everything, the universe or God or whatever word you might use there. And then that oneness is broken into two through the appearance of the other. And an appearance here has to do with eyes and light. So through the appearance of the other in your eye, you see the other and you are terrified, because if there is a you, then there must be a me. You become aware of yourself through the look of the other because they look at you. And in that moment, they transform you into something that can be looked at, a something. So the look alienates in that sense. The look splits the one into the two, both affirming our existence and in some ways violating it. There is a kind of chaotic interdependency where our being is mediated by the other and it's determined by the look of the other. So our being is mediated through negation, mediated by the other. And this passes, I believe, from Sartre to Lacan. I can read another part here where he says, he's commenting on some feedback he had about a class from his students. And he says, some of you were scandalized that Sartre would say you either look with your eyes or you are looked at, but you cannot do both. Think then about passive and active, because in Lacan it's the schism that will become schizophrenia later on. Between the eye, the schism between the eye and the look, that provides one form of break that I can never get rid of. But he says here something that is, to me, very interesting. So that's the point at which we miraculously, in some sense, arrive at aesthetics. We get to painting, and we find out what painting really is. It is the place in which the gaze, or the look, is given a place of rest, so to speak. The painting is going to absorb in itself all of the light, all of the look, and suddenly the look as vulnerability and anxiety, as this alien object, will be for me somehow momentarily safe. And he says it's also a trap for the gaze. It's a place in which the gaze can roam around and be safe. It's a way in which the anxieties of the look can somehow be domesticated and given a moment of rest. So this matter of what painting does for us. Yes, why should people be wasting their time on painting pictures, buying and selling them? Isn't it just representation? He says here, no, it's not just representation. It's the place in which my gaze can be captured and can roam around as if it's in its own reserve. And in fact, he uses the term reserve here in the sense that we talk about reservations of enclosed spaces. Now, what I want to do is to try and situate television, cinema, as the next step in this chain, where we arrive at painting as the means of capturing the gaze. Because in Lacan, like in Sartre, the eye and the gaze are incompatible. And in this world of visibility, there is a kind of blind spot in the painting. A blind spot where you cannot be seen, not because you are hidden, but because everybody else's gaze is captured by the painting. So this idea from Lacan of painting capturing the look positions the painting as the next stage from the familial fireplace, perhaps, or the central bonfire. It positions television after it. We can think about the painting as taking the place of the fireplace, a seemingly infinite place for our look to roam around, mitigating alienation. We might think about the amount of people who gather around the Mona Lisa, for example, the amount of effort poured into decoding and analyzing this painting. It seems to function as having an infinite capacity to absorb our gaze. In a way, cinema and television can be seen as the following on from this, and perhaps that's the magic of television, that it can capture our look and disrupt the process, the alienating process of othering. For example, there is a cliche that we might all be aware of, whether or not we relate to it or not is a different matter, but we are aware of this kind of stress that comes from Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, where you have to gather with your family around a table. And the look is going wild because we're all making eye contact with each other. And in a sense, as we mentioned before, this look, this gaze, it creates a table of schizophrenics and the chaos ensues. But this situation seems to stop when everybody moves to the other room and they start watching a film or they start watching TV, and suddenly the cause of stress seems to evaporate as everybody's gaze is captured by the television, and we move into this new situation of relative harmony. This is something interesting when thinking about Sartre's being for others. This intersubjective dependency, often characterized, or always characterized, by tension and conflict, and in the same way as the Hegelian dialectical struggle for recognition and freedom. But this situation of confrontations and stress stops with the television. So I hope this delivers a little bit of insight into the thought behind this. The connections are subtle yet unbreakable. All of these situations are held together by a kind of nuclear force. The investigations of dialogues on CoreCore was a part of the becoming of Open Secret and a part of the becoming of internet cinema, which is itself a part of an ongoing becoming where fire leads to painting, which leads to cinema and television, all tied together by the look, by being. I think I have time to cover one more point that I hope is pertinent to this, because I wanted to talk a little bit about anamorphoses, because through Lacan, specifically what it is that captures the gaze is the anamorphosis of the painting. And instead of turning to Lacan to look into this, I wanted to perhaps pose something that I found within Deleuze. Now, Deleuze does not talk about dreaming much. In fact, he warns against it. There's this famous quotation of "beware the dream of the other." But you will find something about dreams in Deleuze. It's just hidden away in, of all books, the cinema book, the Time image, where he's basically explaining that you have the dreamer living within the dream, experiencing the dream as if in a kind of desubjectivized way. And he talks about the first image, about a plane of green light that's interrupted by spots of white. Now, in the eyes of the dreamer, this may become a field with flowers. But it only becomes a field of flowers when this image has already become a billiard table with balls. And that only becomes a real image, or it only becomes a fixed image to us when it had already moved on to something else. And he uses this explanation to talk about a large circuit of anamorphoses that are being sketched out. Morphoses, as Jameson suggested, is the thing that within a painting captures our look. I spoke a little bit yesterday about Aphrodite at the Ifil Nova Institute, because there is a sort of fusion going on there where the water reaches up into the sky and captures within its folds air, and in doing so it becomes foam, and there is this kind of miraculous moment where Aphrodite arises from the foam. She's Aphrodite, foam. And so it's a fusion of the water, but it's about this kind of capturing. And when we think about the image, even if it's static, we understand that there's motion there, and it's within the kind of anamorphosis of these motions, the large circuit of imagery that comes out of the static image that captures our gaze. It's somehow being incorporated into it. It's reaching up in the same way that the water does and captures the air in making foam. And that within the Greek mythology, it's the moment that the water captures air that Aphrodite arrives on earth. So heaven arrives on earth at this moment of capturing. And sometimes I'm finding it very interesting at the moment to think about this in terms of the gaze and about the term finding some sort of harmony and stillness within these situations in which we gather around a painting or a film. So I think I'm going to leave it there.
I actually have just one thing. I've been talking so much in the last 2 days, so good that you're talking today that I'm just staying here. Something that comes to mind, when you make this picture of the dinner table, of the family dinner table, and even though we can see some schizophrenic energy there that goes chaotic in lots of places, what comes to mind is a very neurotic table where everybody has to perform their roles. And then suddenly you go to this idea of watching TV as a peaceful practice for the family. And what comes to mind is suddenly all these people are free of being the roles that they have to perform. So the mother doesn't have to be the mother anymore. She can be something else. The son doesn't have to be the son anymore. So there's some kind of emancipation by this relationship with art. I don't know if it's art, but most of all, what I'm trying to elaborate in unconscious television is narrative. that we watch together, even though it's Star Wars or even if it's Pokemon, it is something that there's a narrative in there. And television that is narrative. And what happens when suddenly we are free of performing some roles? And Deleuze and Guattari, in What is Philosophy, in the last chapter that is Affectus, Perceptus, and Concept, they're going to say, it's something that I sent you when we were discussing the book and when we were discussing this presentation and thinking about this idea of the bonfire, this idea of the television, of the painting. Deleuze and Guattari say that affectus and perceptus, when you draw the figure of the man, even if it's a representation, but also if it is man through some other kind of humankind there, even if you're talking about man and doing minimalist art or this performative art where you have to go somewhere, you put man in a constitution of affectus and perceptus in the screen or as a sculpture that sets men free of being men. So you could meet something else. There's a confrontation, there's another possibility that you face when you're looking at art, and then you can make another story for your life, indeed.
Could you say that it's a kind of reverting back to nothingness? Because you don't have to perform that thing anymore, and you become kind of that nothingness again, because before you're performing your role as the son or the daughter or so on, and now you're kind of liberated or emancipated from that, as you said. I have this kind of interpretation of the subtitle of the book, the moving image and the other of the other, and I wonder about the role of this other of the other and to what extent it relates to this other object that is not another subject, and it's not the other in the sense that it doesn't have an eye that it looks at you necessarily, but nonetheless it seems to mitigate this problem of being a nothingness that is, by the look of the other, sort of captured, as you are reminded of your finiteness. And there's this kind of reversion back to being infinite, this kind of desubjectivization that Deleuze talks about quite often.
What comes to mind as well is, it's been, how many years? It's been 80 years that Lacan wrote the text from the mirror stage. And what is very important on the mirror stage when he's going to conceptualize it. So I think the text is written between 45 and 50, and he presents as a lecture, and it is transcribed as a very important text that is only 5 or 6 pages. And this elaboration of the mirror stage is very important because Lacan is going to understand in a very clear way what narcissism is. And narcissism is this investment on your own image by being looked at the other. So it's not only looking at yourself in the mirror, and then Lacan's going to make this image. The children is looking at himself or their self in the mirror, but the children also has to do this movement with the head to look behind and have a confirmation of this image. This confirmation is pretty much the other with capital O. That in that position would be a father, a mother, a grandmother, an aunt, or a nanny. Who is going to confirm this image that you look in the mirror? Schizophrenia comes from not having a confirmation, because you don't know if this image is valid enough. And I think, especially when we do art, we don't have the confirmation of those new things that we are producing. When you're doing fiction, you don't have a confirmation because you don't know how is it going to work with this huge other that Lacan is going to elaborate as language. So this position of being alienated is something that art is constantly making us thinking about or redoing. Art that is alienated is not, it's not interesting. And with unconscious television, and I think is what CoreCore says to us, is that even though those are internet images, even though those are television, anime, something that is taken as like lesser culture, they're making much more interesting stuff than what people are saying they're like good art. They're doing something out of there that is much more transgressive. So even if we get the idea of the CoreCore with, those are 2 words, but they are the same words. But are they the same words? There's a mirror stage at the core, looking at the core, and who's going to confirm what the core is? In a certain ways, what a dada does. It's a da with a da, and what is da? And da in German is not any word. I mean, if you get with the signifier, it's there. I mean, da is to be there. Are you there? Bist du da? So what is there in the end as a core of the CoreCore? Who is going to be there to confirm to us? Is it this book, or is it something that somebody's going to confirm in 20 years or never? That's this nothingness. But nothingness is a friend of chaos. Nothingness that is force of potentiality. Yes. I mean, this is my contribution for today.
Really, I hadn't thought about that aspect of it before.
Yeah.
This was fascinating. First of all, thank you. You were making that jump between like the bonfire, the painting, the cinematic, be it film or television. I find it interesting that you like the first one, the bonfire, has the light. So does the third one with the cinematic, not the painting. It's not emitting light, but how do you see that transition between the stillness of painting and the moving image? What happens there? Is this absorption more for you in painting,
it's something that
moving
I've been thinking about, because I noticed that in this series of 4 that I put out, there are these kinds of relatively big jumps, and it makes sense to think about it as in terms of something capturing your gaze. But I would say that we discussed this actually, I think yesterday at Ifilnova, that there is a lot of movement to still images, and this comes up in the book actually. It's also coming from Thomas Lamar, of whom the book is dedicated to, that when people tend to judge animation from Japan as being limited animation, it's because there's still frames within it, it's not entirely animated. And Lamar says that instead of judging this as a lesser form of animation, somehow perhaps there is something more interesting going in there, because it's because of the static image. So that's one thing that I've been thinking as of yesterday. And then maybe there's some other kind of more simple interpretations that, like, even, we are tourists in Lisbon, so we went to the museum and we saw the Monet and this breaking up of the ice, where it's a static image, but there is a lot of motion to it. And you can either talk about the way that the painting implies motion through brushstrokes, or you can talk about the way that the thickness, the extrusion of the paint off the canvas creates shadows, that as you and everybody else is moving, it creates movement itself, so it becomes a kind of mirror for that motion, even though it is static. So I'm thinking about it in terms of, yes, you have something moving, something still, and then something moving again. But somehow the techniques of painting perhaps create movement even where there's a still image. And I'm curious about the role of cinema and television, because again you have this external object, but the television itself doesn't move, something is moving on it. And there is this kind of contrast between the static again and the motion on the static. But then there's also the element of heat. And it's something I find interesting, that where painting is maybe cold, with television you end up back at the bonfire a bit more, the circle closes around again, because the television, especially for Japanese kids sitting so close to the television, they're getting a heat, they're getting a radiation from this external body. And I think that brings to Godard's image of hugging the television. Somehow there is a kind of, maybe before the bonfire is the mother or something like this, and we have this kind of disconnected series of iterations of something that is serving some kind of psychoanalytical function. And I think that that's what tracks through from the mother, from the television, and maybe cinema is placed in there. But also the way that we watch fire. We might think that it's sort of maybe something banal and we're in front of it because it's warm, but fire it's never the same. As an image, it is constantly changing. And we get drawn into that, and I think that's where the Anamorphosis come in, because the fire sketches out a circuit of imagery instead of being a static image. And perhaps the same is going on with something like a Monet painting or a static painting, that we know history, we've seen other things, and in the painting we are seeing a lot of other things as well. It sends our mind racing and running, so there's this kind of element of like, is there some kind of fire to the aesthetics of cinema? Did cinema somehow develop out of our sort of habit of looking into fire, looking into warmth and something like that? I hope that answers in some way your question.
What is interesting about cinema is that cinema in a way replicates what we see in the mirror stage, because it comes from behind and you kind of have to look to see where it comes from, where this image is coming from, and TV is in front of you. And it has this warmth of a body, and especially in the image that Godard uses in Prénom Carmen, it's a very autistic relationship. We even have the illustrations that Alexandre made of the Ferencian boy that stays inside of the bathtub and makes the assemblage of how to live a different life inside of water. I mean, a life that denies and does negation, but it's a life, it's still a life. It's a life that doesn't operate with the symbolic in the same way that we do. It's an autistic life, it's a psychotic life, but it's a life. It's another way of living, of being human in ways. I mean, I'm not even pro using the word human that way, but I mean, it's a human life there, but it's a different one. So how can you have something else? I mean, I'm always interested in this differentiation, in novelty.
I was also thinking from yesterday, is that for me one of the defining experiences of the television is the zapping, and how you're subjected to things that you did not choose. So it's a kind of bit disturbing feel to that. You don't get with movies, because you pay to go and see the movie that you chose. And even if you're on Netflix or whatever, you're choosing to put this series because you like it. I always loved zapping just because I am subjected to something that is completely outside of my realm of choice. Another that's throwing something at me.
There's something very CoreCore about that. The zapping of television shows comes in many ways predecessor to the aesthetics of CoreCore, because you are not the one zapping, but you could be. I mean, it would be very, very simple to frame a CoreCore exhibition where you are the one with remote control zapping through material that has been arranged by the editor, for example.
I feel like that's almost chaotic energy of the internet is also getting very subverted with algorithms. That's like it's another that's like a big brother that knows what you want before you want it. Television is not exactly like that. It's a lot more chaotic.
Yeah, and the algorithm, it works like that. It kind of knows what you already want, and then you think, oh yeah, it's a chance, but it's not chance. We have an image inside of the book that is the bomb boxes playing music with the fire, dancing to music, and I think it works with what you're talking about. It's from a Brazilian artist. Her name is Vivian Kakuri, and she made this beautiful work where she puts candles in front of boom boxes, and the flame dances to music or to every word that is spoken. So it's another way of writing. And then there are a bunch of theorists that are going to say, writing is not something cultural. Writing is nature. And then it kind of fucks up our minds, you know. Writing being something that's nature. I mean, Derrida is going to talk about
I was going to say Derrida, he talks and has kind of the interpretation of writing as kind of negative. It's a negative thing, as opposed to the dominance of the positive voice throughout Western philosophy. But for the sake of adhering to Dana's schedule for Open Secret tonight, I think we should take a break, so we have at least 5 minutes and we can get there on time. Thank you very much for coming for this session. I hope it was somehow interesting for you.
The screening is upstairs.
Yes, thank you very much. So we go upstairs together in 5 minutes, and I hope that what we have done here helps to explain why we are in Lisbon, what's going on with these kinds of books, and perhaps influence how you might watch the films tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And the books will be here. If anyone wants to buy, the books will be here sold by the bookstore.